It's my privilege to introduce our newest member of this group. Jerry Neal is a decorated World War II Army Air Corps pilot. He's going to share his story with you tonight. Jerry served as a B-17 and a B-24 pilot in the 8th Air Force, the 490th Bomb Group, the 849th Squadron, and he was stationed in England during his combat flying time, which was late 43 to sometime in the second half of 1944. Jerry would not tell you this, so I will. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for numerous deep penetration flights into Germany. He was also awarded the Air Medal with 5 oak leaf clusters. After the war, Jerry stayed in the Air Force Reserve, retiring after 20 years of service as a captain. Following his return home, Jerry began a long and successful business career, primarily in sales and marketing positions with Honeywell, based in Minneapolis.
In the early 1940s, there was a lot of troop trains put together by the Army Air Corps that went around various parts of the Midwest picking up young lads off of farms and off of cities, such as myself, to go in to fight the Great War, which we didn't know was going to be a great war at the time. I was one of those guys, and that's what I'm going to tell you tonight, is my story, because it does kind of correlate with hundreds of, tens of thousands of young guys. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri in 1921. You guys do the mathematics. It's too much for me. So I'm old. Born in 21, the period of decades, as memory goes, was an opulent period. My grandfather, who was our family, was an entrepreneur type guy. He was a physician-trained pharmacist, but he accumulated drugstores and banks and soft drink companies in the 20s. And I can remember, as just a small lad, the entertainment in our home, the just beautiful, wonderful times. I remember all that seemed to be good. But in the 30s, things diametrically opposed, 20s and the 30s. 29 came, people lost fortunes, and the Great Depression, as far as I know right now, it still can be called the Great Depression, started. My grandfather was reduced to one drugstore. He had bank managers that ran off with the money. Can't do that anymore, but they did that then. But in any event, I grew up in the drugstore business in the 30s. I remember the dust storms of the 35s, 36s, and the heat. And you talk about climate warming. We had climate warming. Out in Kansas, the dust storms were so bad, the dust would just roll into Kansas City so bad that you thought it was like fog. And the heat pharmacist, the people came to him because they called him Doc. And they come to him and they'd say, "Doc, my wife's sick. She's got this, so and so." Describe the malady, and he said, "Just a minute." And he'd go back to the prescription counter and he would compound, a word we don't hear anymore, compound a liquid or a powder or a capsule, and come out and he said, "Here, you tell the man what to do." And "Doc, I just don't have a job right now. Can I put it on?" So he'd write down a little piece of paper and stick it in the cash register. He did that time after time after time, knowing they probably never would get the money for it. But you talk about a good training for a young guy in ethics. I had it. Anyway, I graduated from high school in 1938 and was looking for work. Patriotism was high then. After Pearl Harbor, it changed in patriotism. So we were trying to decide, what service do we want to enlist in? And I said, well, I don't want to go in the Navy. I've never been close to water. So we're trying. We heard this story, this announcer on the radio talk about that the Army Air Corps and the Army was introducing a new program called gliders. They were going to glide troops in behind enemy lines, and they were looking for glider pilots, candidates to be a glider pilot. And the requirements for that was to take the U.S. Army Air Corps Aviation cadet examination and fail it. And I looked at Glenn, and he looked at me and said, "We can do that." We didn't have a lot of self-esteem. Anyway, we went to Kansas City, Kansas, federal courthouse, and took the Army Air Corps examination tape. It took us about 4 hours to do it. It was a very intense exam. And they posted the grades that afternoon on a big card, and unbeknownst, my friend got in the glider pilot program, and I got in the aviation cadet program. Had no idea ever thinking about flying an airplane. I really didn't know much about airplanes. You'd see one on newsreel, never been on an aerodrome, never been close to one, but all of a sudden, I'm going to be an aviation cadet, flying a plane. Went to basic flight training in Winfield, Kansas, which was the first single-engine, closed cockpit, 450 horsepower engine airplane. It was a Vultee made here in Nashville, out by the airport. We called it the Vultee vibrator because it just like that. But it was a fully instrumented airplane, and first time I did night flights with that plane. So I went from basic, graduated that phase, and went to advanced training, and they chose me to go into bombers. So I went to Aldous, Oklahoma for twin engine training, graduated from Aldous, was a commission as a second lieutenant and an aeronautical rating as a pilot. From there I went to what we called phase training, Mountain Home, Idaho, where I was first introduced to a B-24, a four-engine bomber, which at the time was one of the largest bombers, airplanes in the world. I climbed on that plane the first time I flew it and got up in the pilot's seat. And I thought, how in my world am I going to fly this airplane? Anyway, we got to Fortaleza, stayed there overnight, and headed out the next night across the South Atlantic Ocean. Now, South Atlantic, this was going to be a 2,000-mile trip. So long that our fuel tanks didn't have enough fuel, so they put rubber fuel tanks in our bomb bays to get us across. Filled, I have to get 400 or 500 extra gallons of gas. The other thing that was interesting about that was we had a navigator, sextant, and all that kind of well-trained. I'd never used him, never trained him, never knew what his capability was. It was kind of stupid when you think about it. So we get out, take off, clear moonlight night. We take out, and we're out about 15 minutes, and we start going in between undercast and overcast. So we're in between. We're in the clear, but we got undercast unders, overcast over. He couldn't take sextant shots. So what in the world are we going to do? 2,000-mile flight? We don't know whether that guy can navigate or not. He took us across that ocean. He'd tell me to take drift readings about every 45 minutes, and I'd go down right off the top, and he would read the wave for motions and get back up and do his calculations. He told us early on, he says, we're going to be on Dakar at such and such a time at 9:01, I forget what it was, a.m. And he hit that son of a gun right on the minute, right over Dakar. So, he always was my friend from then on. Landed in Dakar on metal strips. Scared the heck out of me when we hit those metal strips. Sounded like the whole plane falling apart. And we stopped, and these beautiful cynical black natives came out there. There's one over Costco, if at Costco in Charlotte. 7.5 feet, thin, beautiful. We were there, we took off, and we started up across the Sahara Desert. Miles and hours over sand. Seeing an occasional camel caravan. And we got to the Atlas Mountains. and spread, went up over the Atlas Mountains. History. I'm living geography and history. Landed at Marrakesh, stayed there overnight. From my standpoint, Marrakesh is the dirtiest city in the world. Horrible place. Took off from there the next day, went up over the North Atlantic, past Portugal, Spain, and landed in England on the western shores, and then crossed England and found our base in East Anglia. We did our orientation, we started our missions, and that first mission, we went into some target in the lowlands, I forget where it was now, but we were so shot up by anti-aircraft fire when I got that B-24 back.
It was so totally shot up, they put it in what we used to call the boneyard. They couldn't fly it any longer, couldn't repair it. The second mission, B-24 I got, came back so damaged they put it in the boneyard. So I just kind of like to go through what a typical mission was like with you, because it was very, very different. They'd get us up, we'd find out that we didn't really know what our mission was going to be. We'd be curious the night before, and we'd go to the adjutant's office to find out what the gas and bomb load was, because that kind of give you a clue. If it was a heavy bomb load and a low gas load, that meant was not going to be a deep penetration. If it's reversed and said, oh, we're going in deep, which we never wanted to do. Anyway, we'd do that, and we'd go to bed, never slept. I don't know anybody that slept. You'd see them at night, and somebody smoking a cigarette and coughing. 2 o'clock, the orderly would come in to wake us up. 2 o'clock, we went up to mess to get some breakfast. I never ate breakfast, I just couldn't stand it. And from there, we went to the flight line where we got on our uniform, our flying outfit. Here's something to just think about. I wore long underwear, a full uniform, pants and shirt, and over that, I put on the long, like coveralls, and over that, I put on fleece-lined pants and a fleece-lined jacket with heavy suspenders to hold up the pants. I wore uniform shoes, put them in boots, 22,000, 25,000 to 30,000 feet. 30,000 feet was our bombing. We'd fly into, if it was a deep penetration, we would be flying up in atmosphere. My free air temperature gauge showed it was pegged at -70, and a needle on the free air temperature gauge would peg at -70. You take your hand out of your glove, if it was out 3 minutes, you had frostbite that had to be amputated. It was that serious. We'd do the bomb run with, at first, when I first got over there, 20 missions was the tour, and I went to 25. Our loss rate was 20% per mission, so we figured out pretty early on there was no way we were going to survive. It went as soon as we got fighter escorts that could go in even to the low country with us, that went up to 25 missions. Stayed there till the wing tanks came on. They got the wing tanks, and then it went to 30 and 35 missions. I actually did about 100 missions to get 35 counting missions. You only got to count when you got in so far into deep where you were actually dropping bombs, then they count that as a mission. But all the missions you flew that were weather related, you were aborted because of mechanical problems, so forth, it didn't count. So I went through all that crap for a lot of times. We go over the mission, we hit the initial point and start the bomb run, 15, 18-minute bomb run, where the whole group had spread out, got in bombing position, and flew straight and level, no deviation, 15 to 18 minutes. We totally subjected to anti-aircraft fire. And that's where they tried to hit us the hardest. That's where we did get hit the hardest. We get through that, do the bombs, and go off the target as fast as we could, and join back up whatever was left to fly back to base. And there the fighters, if we had fighter escort at that time, they'd pick us up again, because they didn't go into targets with us. They'd stay off the side. Now, the way the fighter escorts worked at that time was P-47s and P-38s stayed with us. P-51s, after Doolittle took over, were doing targets of opportunity. They didn't stay with us, but they were there. We'd see them flying over this way, then they'd go back another group this way. They were looking for, and that's the way they did so much damage to the airfields and the Luftwaffe. We'd finished my missions. I'd lost on D-Day, which was a mission that I didn't know what was coming up. They woke us up, typically, like they always did. Went up to the briefing room and got in our chairs and sat down waiting for the commanding officer to come and tell us what our mission was going to be. Which, incidentally, he'd walk down the full-board colonel walking down with his staff. And we called him the old man. He was 25 years old. Yeah, a lot of battlefield promotions. Pull back the curtain, and there it was, D-Day, Operation Overlord. We heard a lot about it. We didn't have a whole lot of details about it, but we're going to be a part of it. I'm going to be a part of it. So our mission that day was to bomb Caen, a little town, French town, to destroy the highway intersections there, because there were some Panzer divisions that were in reserve back of Caen, waiting to see where it was going to be needed. We got over the target. It was total undercast. We couldn't see the drop, and didn't have the electronics gear then that we have now. So we flew around, waiting for a break. Never happened. So CO said, we got to head back to base because we're running low on fuel. Started back to base and got over the English Channel, and I ran out of gas. All 4 engines, those 1,850 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engines, big noise going on out there. All 4 just went and stopped. And that B-24 just went, ew. And you had to push the wheel forward just to keep from stalling out, because you had to keep speed up. So I started dropping down toward the English Channel, and I bailed out my crew. And I looked back, as I was looking back, as I was speeding down toward the water, I looked back to see if they're out. And I forgot, all these darn bombs are sitting right here in back of me. Still had them on board. So I pulled the salvo lever, and when you do that, it pulls the pins on the bomb bay door, so the doors drop off and the bombs drop out. So here they go. I'm dropping like this, and they go plunk, 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 down in the water. But it was so close to the water, they didn't arm. You know, they armed them with those little props on the front. They didn't arm, so they just plunked into the water. And as I started to flare out, just like God placed it there, was this little island, like a sandbar, except it was gravel, right out in the middle of the channel, right there in front of me. I couldn't have done a better job of finding some place. Pulled out and started down on that gravel. And now the bomb bay doors are off, so this B-24 starts scooping up gravel like a giant shovel, breaks off the back of the plane, tears off all the engine while I'm still rolling down the ground, grinds up the fuselage up to the cockpit, tears off the nose, and we stop. And the other pilot and the navigator who said, I'm not going to jump, wrote it down with us, we crawled out on the wing. You know, no, why? Why did we survive? Because most of my crew, right here, this is my original crew. Most of those guys drowned English Channel. Great guys, young men, wonderful guys. Didn't know how to get out of parachutes over water. The Air Corps didn't say, well, we don't need to do that. So they never trained us how to do that. I went around, they sent an ambulance down from the base that I used to go around the MASH units down in the southern part of England to try to find my guys. I only found one. Went back to base, and the base had been, in that 10 days that we were doing all this, base had been converted to B-17s from B-24s. And that was great. The B-17 was so much better plane than the B-24 for that theater, the high altitude there. So I finished my missions in B-17s, tough missions. I lost one. I won't go into all the losses I had with that. When I got to my 34th mission, because I now had a bunch of new people that were my crew, the rule at the time was is that most of your crew, 10 people, have finished their missions and you're 1 or 2 short. You can end your tour also. I was at 34 missions and most of the crew did 35. And I thought, I made it. Well, they came down and say, hey, Neal, with the new rule, everybody's got to do 35 missions. And you're the first guy that's affected by this. You know what the thoughts went through my mind? You know, there's no way I'm going to, there's an ohm in there somewhere or other. So he said, well, to make it easy for you, you can pick your mission and pick your crew. So I went up to headquarters every night looking for the mission, you know, statistics and so on. I finally found one that's going to be a high gas load, low bomb load. So, okay, that's going to be a short run. Okay, I'll take that one. Found out it was a lead plane. I was going to buy a lead plane, which is always the worst plane to have, because that's what the anti-aircraft guys went for. Got that, and that's another omen. Anyway, did the mission. The tail end of our group was totally shot up, and the front end, the lead end, got through it. So I landed my 35 missions. Came back to the States at the time of the Battle of the Bulge. And went to what they call redistribution out in California, where they tested me physically, mentally, everything to see if I was still whole, to send me to B-29s in the Pacific. But they asked me, which is unheard of at the time, what would you like to do? Now, you ever hear the Army ask you what you'd like to do? Well, I was one of the first combat returnees, so they kind of were treating us different. So I said, well, I think I'd like to be in a 4-engine, multi-engine instructor pilot. Okay, Lieutenant Neal, where would you like to go? Well, I'd like to go to that base up at San Francisco because it was called the Country Club of the Air Force at the time. You have your orders in 10 days. You just watch for them on the bulletin board and tell them that's where you go. Well, I got my orders in 10 days. Go to single engine school in a little town down in the Rio Grande Valley. Exactly. Yeah. So as minute I got down there, they turned me around and sent me up to Waco, which was a central instructor school for pilot training. And I went through the instructor pilot training school for single engine. And when I got to the tail end of that, they asked me, Lieutenant Neal, we'd like to ask you if you would become the school secretary for this big school, which was the military operating head. I don't know why they asked me to do that, but I said, sure. You know, that's when I changed my MOS from piloting to administrating. That's what I was doing when the conflict ended, and I was trying to decide whether or not I want to stay in. I liked it. I think I'd like to stay in, but I was advised then that unless you go through an academy, your promotional opportunities going forward is going to be remote. So I got out and went back to civilian life. Went to work for Honeywell, which incidentally, Honeywell was the first time I saw them. They were our autopilot in the B-17, tied into the Norden bomb site. Never heard of Honeywell before that. Went to work for them, had a great career, great company. Retired for that company, started my own business, grew that business, sold it to a large corporation, worked out fine. Got in newspaper business, was managing editor of an industry newspaper, did that, retired from that, and now I'm with SCORE, and that's the end of my story. Thank you, guys.